Now that the full specs for the GH5 have been revealed and it's already available for pre-order and should be shipping in a couple months, I looked through all the specs, did my video talking about everything you need to know, but something was mysteriously left out of the GH5, and it's something that would be a really valuable feature to have built into the GH5, and that's built-in ND filters. Now, if you don't understand the value of ND filters, basically I'll just boil it down to you need ND filters because if you're shooting video, you should be following most of the time, if not all the time, the 180-degree shutter angle rule, and that's very difficult to do outdoors with a shallow depth of field if you don't have NDs. Now, I have made a bunch of other videos talking about that, but basically ND filters are very, very valuable. And most of the time what I'm doing is putting either variable NDs or regular NDs right on the front of the lens, but every time you change a lens or you want to change a shot, you've got to twist that off and put another one back on. Sure, you could get a matte box and do your ND filtration that way. That can be really expensive and it still is time consuming. So having built-in ND filters right in the camera is really handy because any camera that does that, it's a flip of the fingers and you've got a brand new ND setting. Very, very helpful, especially for run and gun, documentary, ENG type style shooting, as well as for cinema production, because if they're right there, the faster you can be, the more efficient you can be. Sometimes that's even better. So why doesn't the GH5 have built-in ND filters? Part of me wanted to initially say that this was just Panasonic holding back a feature because they're reserving it for their higher end market, because the GH5 uses the micro four third mount and there are higher end cinema style, broadcast style cameras like the AF100 and the JVC LS300 that both use the micro four thirds mount. And those both have built-in NDs. They're quite a bit more expensive cameras than the GH5. But why can't the GH5 have that? Now, in some interviews, you'll see people from Panasonic saying, well, in the micro four third mount, there just isn't room for ND filters. Well, those cameras have ND filters and they have micro four third mount. So what's the deal? Clearly there is room. And this was really just making me really frustrated and just kind of disappointed in Panasonic for not pushing this feature strong enough on the GH5. I love all the features that have been announced for the GH5, but it would just been that extra layer of icing on the cake if it had built-in ND filters, because it's very, very valuable from a video perspective. But someone, I asked in the comments on 4-3 Rumors, like, why, they say it won't fit, why won't it fit? And silly me, of course, I'm not thinking from the photography perspective, because the GH5 is also a photo camera, and therefore it has a mechanical shutter built into it. Now that mechanical shutter adds extra stuff inside of the micro four third mount, and so then yes, there isn't room. I mean, it makes sense from that perspective when you have other stuff in there that you don't need on those video cameras that only do video and don't need to take photos. You don't have to have a mechanical shutter in there. But if the GH5 didn't have a mechanical shutter, photographers who would be looking for that camera would be upset about that. So it does make sense that the GH5 doesn't have built-in ND filters because, yeah, the micro four third mount is very little room. Thankfully, there are some, external NDs that you can put on the front of the lens. You can also go the matte box route, but there's also some cool new adapters coming. I don't know if any of them are out already, but they basically, if you have like a Canon EF lens or a Nikon lens, you have to use those adapters to get it to micro four third. Well, now those adapters are starting to put ND filters in there, which is a huge benefit. I think Aperture has one that's coming with electronic ND built in. I may be wrong on the company. I need to look into it a little bit more. Unfortunately, I haven't seen one that's a speed booster and ND filter. If that combo could come together, and I don't know if there's room for it, maybe that adapter, there's just not room, but if that could happen, that would be awesome, because having all these filters built right in, or just, available, not built in, but maybe you can buy an adapter to kind of just add it to the camera as something you just always have, no matter what lens you're using, that would be so helpful. And then you don't have to worry about the thread size on the lens. You don't have to worry about an expensive matte box and, are the filters 4x4 or what size are they? It would just be right there on the camera. No questions asked. Easy, right? So it'd be even better if it was built into the camera, but unfortunately it looks like there's not room because of that mechanical shutter. Now, if there would ever be a GH5 or GH6 or maybe a GH camera that was just for video, maybe Panasonic would be wise to put an ND filter right in there, because I know myself and many other video enthusiasts, professionals, and even amateurs would get a huge benefit of it. When you think of exposure, a lot of times people boil it down to aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, because that's the photography, you know, the triangle, right? The exposure triangle for photography is aperture, ISO, or gain, and shutter. But for video, we have that extra feature that we want, or extra component, right? It's not really an exposure triangle anymore. Maybe it's an exposure diamond or something like that, but we have that ND component because we need to keep the shutter speed relatively fixed for the frame rate. Photographers can use whatever shutter speed they want because, hey, it's a static photo, but when we're dealing with motion, we need to consider motion blur and how that plays and how it plays back and how it looks. So having that set 180-degree shutter angle, having that set and needing to follow that, but also wanting the shallow depth of field, so shooting, you know, wide open or pretty close to wide open, and then trying to keep your ISO low, but you can't go too low, right? There's only, most cameras bottom out around like 100, some go down to 50, some are limited to the base of 200 in video mode. So having ND filters is a huge advantage from a video perspective, and that's the nature of these hybrid cameras, is they're hybrid, so you can't always have the best of both worlds, but thankfully the GH5 is looking to try and accommodate the best of both worlds, increasing the megapixel count for the photo component, but also adding a ton of video features. So I'm really excited about the GH5, really curious to see what Sony does with the A7S Mark III whenever that is announced, to see kind of what features are going to come on that, because I expect that to be incredibly competitive with the GH5. So we'll see, but right now the GH5 is looking like an awesome camera. Just a shame it doesn't have built-in ND filters, but hey, you can't get everything, right?